Some tractors don't fail because they're bad machines. They fail because the world isn't ready for them. In the 1980s, a few manufacturers took huge risks. They introduced technology farmers had never seen before: advanced hydraulics, futuristic designs, experimental drivetrains, and features decades ahead of their time. But instead of success, these tractors confused buyers, scared mechanics, and arrived too early to be understood. Today, we're counting down the 10 tractors from the 1980s that were too advanced for their time. Machines that predicted the future of farming, but paid the price for being ahead of it. Watch closely, because modern tractors are finally catching up. Number 10. Massey Ferguson 300 Series. When the Massey Ferguson 300 Series arrived in the mid to late 90s, it didn't look radical in the way massive four-wheel drive tractors did. There were no record-breaking horsepower figures or shocking dimensions, and that was precisely why many farmers failed to recognize just how advanced these machines really were. The 300 series was built around a philosophy that most of the farming world had not yet fully embraced. Operator efficiency, ergonomics, and system balance mattered as much as raw strength. At a time when many tractors were still little more than upgraded versions of 1960s designs, the MF 300 series quietly introduced ideas that would later become industry standards. One of the most forward-thinking aspects of the 300 series was the cab design. Massey Ferguson invested heavily in visibility, noise reduction, heating, ventilation, and control layout. Long before operator comfort became a marketing buzzword, these tractors acknowledged that fatigue directly affected productivity. The controls were placed logically, gear selection was smoother, and the driving experience was noticeably more refined than what most farmers were used to. For many buyers in the 1980s, this felt unnecessary. Farming culture still valued toughness over comfort, but time would prove Massey Ferguson absolutely right. Mechanically, the tractors were also ahead of their era. Improved hydraulics allowed for better implement control, faster response times, and greater lift precision. The engines were tuned for efficiency rather than brute force, reflecting a forward-looking understanding that fuel costs and long operating hours mattered just as much as peak output. The transmission options provided flexibility that many operators didn't yet know how to fully utilize, especially smaller farmers who were accustomed to simple gearboxes. Ironically, this balance of features worked against the 300 series at launch. Many farmers didn't want to pay extra for comfort, refined hydraulics, or smoother drivetrains. Dealers often struggled to explain why these invisible improvements justified the price. But decades later, the reputation of the MF 300 series has aged exceptionally well. These tractors are now remembered as machines that anticipated modern farming realities long before most competitors accepted them. A clear case of being too advanced for their time. Number 9. Fiatagri 90 Series. The Fiatagri 90 series, launched in 1984, represented one of the most ambitious tractor family updates of the decade. Fiat didn't simply refresh an old lineup. It reimagined what a modern agricultural tractor should feel like to operate. These machines combined improved engines, significantly upgraded transmissions, and far more refined cabs than most competitors were offering at the time. In hindsight, the 90 series looks like it belonged to the 1990s, not the mid-1980s. One of the standout features was transmission sophistication. The 90 series introduced better gear spacing, smoother shifting, and configurations that allowed operators to keep engines operating in optimal power bands. This was a big deal in an era when many tractors forced drivers to compromise between speed and torque. Fiat engineers understood that efficiency came from maintaining momentum, not just horsepower, and designed drivetrains that supported that philosophy. Unfortunately, many farmers were not yet trained or inclined to operate tractors this way, which meant the benefits were often underused. Cab design was another leap forward. Noise levels were reduced, visibility was improved, and control layouts became more intuitive. Fiat treated the cab as a working environment rather than an afterthought. Long hours became less exhausting, and productivity increased. But again, these gains were subtle rather than dramatic. Farmers who judged tractors primarily by engine size or pulling capacity often overlooked these advantages. The downside of this advancement was complexity. Improved hydraulics, more refined transmissions, and modern cab systems required better trained technicians and more specialized parts inventories. In regions where dealer networks were weaker, downtime could be longer than farmers were comfortable with. This created a perception that the tractors were complicated, even though their engineering was fundamentally sound. Over time, many of the ideas pioneered in the Fiatagri 90 series became standard across the industry. What once seemed unnecessary became expected. The tractors didn't fail because they were flawed. They struggled because they arrived before the average farmer, dealer, and service infrastructure was ready to support what Fiat had built. Number 8. Allis-Chalmers 7000 and 8000 series. The Allis-Chalmers 7000 and 8000 series tractors are some of the most misunderstood machines of the 1980s. On paper and in real-world operation, they were genuinely advanced. These tractors featured improved cabs, better weight distribution, strong hydraulic systems, and drivetrains that could handle demanding workloads with ease. Yet they were launched during one of the worst possible moments in the company's history, and that timing ultimately overshadowed their technical achievements. From an engineering perspective, Allis-Chalmers was pushing toward modernization. Cab isolation was improved, operator visibility was enhanced, and noise levels were reduced compared to earlier generations. The tractors were designed for longer working days, acknowledging that modern farming required sustained performance rather than short bursts of power. Hydraulics were capable and responsive, supporting increasingly complex implements that were beginning to dominate large acreage farms. However, advanced engineering cannot survive without support. During the 1980s, Allis-Chalmers faced severe financial and organizational struggles. Dealer networks shrank, parts availability became inconsistent, and confidence in the brand eroded. This meant that even though the tractors themselves were capable, owners often worried about long-term serviceability. Advanced features that should have been strengths became sources of anxiety when dealers disappeared or inventories dried up. This situation unfairly damaged the reputation of the tractors themselves. Many machines that should have enjoyed long, celebrated service lives were retired early or sold cheaply simply because owners feared future support problems. In reality, many of these tractors proved extremely durable and capable when maintained properly. Looking back, the Allis-Chalmers 7000 and 8000 series represent a tragic mismatch between engineering ambition and corporate stability. The machines were ahead of their time, but they were released into a system that could not fully sustain them. Their legacy today is that of what could have been, rather than what they truly were. Advanced, well-designed tractors caught in the collapse of a once great manufacturer. Number 7. Deutz-Fahr DX series. The Deutz-Fahr DX series stands as one of the clearest examples of 1980s tractors being technologically ahead of the curve. While most manufacturers were still perfecting purely mechanical systems, Deutz-Fahr dared to introduce early electronic assistance and advanced hydraulic control into mainstream agricultural tractors. This was a bold move, and one that many farmers were not psychologically ready to accept. The DX series featured refined transmissions, powerful air-cooled engines, and advanced cab designs that prioritized operator comfort and control. But what truly set these tractors apart was the integration of electro-hydraulic systems, particularly in hitch control and monitoring. These systems allowed for more precise implement depth, smoother operation, and better consistency across fields. Today, these ideas seem obvious. In the 1980s, they felt risky. Farmers were skeptical of anything electrical. Electronics were associated with fragility, complexity, and expensive repairs. Deutz-Fahr's systems were actually robust for their time, but perception mattered more than reality. Many operators preferred the familiarity of mechanical levers and manual adjustments, even if those methods were less efficient. As a result, some of the DX series' most innovative features went underappreciated or unused. Service infrastructure also lagged behind the technology. Not every dealership had technicians trained to diagnose electrical issues, and early diagnostic tools were primitive compared to today's standards. This made troubleshooting slower and occasionally frustrating, reinforcing the idea that the tractors were too complicated. Despite these challenges, the DX series quietly laid the groundwork for modern tractor design. The idea that electronics could assist rather than replace mechanical strength would later define the industry. Deutz-Fahr was simply too early. The DX tractors didn't fail because they were unreliable. They struggled because the farming world hadn't yet accepted that the future of tractors would involve more than steel and gears. Number 6. International Harvester 50 series. The International Harvester 50 series tractors were some of the earliest machines to treat a tractor as an integrated system rather than a collection of mechanical parts. Introduced in the early 1980s, models like the 588, 5288, and 5488 incorporated features that would later become standard, but at the time felt almost unnecessary, even suspicious to many farmers. These tractors weren't just about horsepower, they were about information, monitoring, and control, concepts that were well ahead of mainstream agricultural thinking. One of the most forward-looking aspects of the 50 series was the introduction of onboard monitoring systems. These systems tracked critical operating parameters such as engine temperature, oil pressure, and drivetrain behavior, alerting the operator when something wasn't right. Today this seems obvious. In the 1980s it felt like overkill. Most farmers were used to relying on sound, vibration, and instinct rather than warning lights and digital alerts. As a result, many operators ignored or even distrusted these systems, seeing them as another thing that could fail. The cab itself was also a leap forward. Improved sound insulation, better visibility, and more refined control placement made the tractor far more comfortable for long working days. IH engineers clearly understood that farming was becoming a marathon, not a sprint. Reduced fatigue meant better consistency and fewer mistakes, but again, these benefits were subtle and difficult to quantify at the dealership level. Where the 50 series struggled was timing. International Harvester was already facing financial instability, and the farming crisis of the 1980s made buyers cautious. Advanced systems require strong dealer support, trained technicians, and consistent parts availability, all things that became increasingly uncertain during this period. When something went wrong, even a minor sensor issue could sideline a tractor longer than farmers were comfortable with. In retrospect, the IH 50 series predicted the modern tractor almost perfectly. Onboard diagnostics, operator alerts, and integrated systems are now unavoidable. IH wasn't wrong, it was simply early. The farming world needed another decade to fully accept what these tractors were trying to introduce. Number 5. Ford FW60. The Ford FW60 was not just a tractor, it was a statement. Built in collaboration with Steiger, this massive articulated four-wheel drive machine pushed Ford into a segment that most of its traditional customers had never experienced before. With a powerful V8 engine, enormous pulling capacity, and articulated steering, the FW60 represented a level of scale that was simply unfamiliar to many farms in the early 90s. From an engineering standpoint, the tractor was impressive. Weight distribution was carefully managed. The drivetrain was designed for sustained heavy loads, and the machine excelled in deep tillage and large-scale field operations. For farms that truly needed this level of power, the FW60 was transformative. It could pull implements that would overwhelm conventional row crop tractors and do so with stability and consistency. The problem was not the machine, it was the market. Most Ford dealers were accustomed to selling mid-sized tractors to mixed-use farms. Suddenly, they were responsible for supporting a highly specialized industrial-scale machine. Parts were larger, heavier, and more expensive. Service required equipment and expertise that many dealerships didn't yet have. When something broke, repairs could take longer than farmers expected, reinforcing the perception that the tractor was too much. Additionally, many farmers simply weren't ready for articulated tractors. Driving dynamics were different. Transport required more planning, and the learning curve was steep. In an era when credit was tight and risk tolerance was low, adopting such a radical machine felt dangerous. Ironically, the FW60 foreshadowed the modern high-horsepower tractor market almost perfectly. Today, articulated 4WD tractors are essential on large farms. In the early 1980s, however, the FW60 arrived before most farmers, dealers, and infrastructure were prepared to support that level of scale. Number 4. Steiger Series 3 and 4. Steiger's Series 3 and 4 tractors were built with a singular philosophy. Agriculture would continue to scale up, and machines needed to be ready for that future. These tractors were massive, purpose-built four-wheel drive machines designed for continuous heavy work. Everything about them, from frame strength to drivetrain capacity, assumed long hours, huge implements, and serious acreage. What made these tractors ahead of their time wasn't just horsepower. It was the way Steiger engineered durability and serviceability into machines expected to work relentlessly. Modular components, accessible service points, and ruggedized systems reflected an industrial mindset rather than a traditional farm equipment approach. The cabs, while not luxurious by modern standards, were thoughtfully designed to reduce fatigue during long shifts, something most manufacturers were still ignoring. However, the agricultural world of the early 1980s wasn't ready for tractors of this magnitude. Many farms simply didn't have enough land to justify them. Implement technology was still catching up, and logistical challenges, transportation, storage, maintenance made ownership intimidating. These tractors made sense for the future, not the present. Economics also played a role. High purchase prices and operating costs limited the customer base. While Steiger understood where agriculture was heading, the broader industry needed another decade of consolidation before machines like these became essential rather than optional. Today, Steiger's philosophy looks prophetic. Large, articulated tractors dominate high-acreage farming. In the 1980s, though, Series 3 and 4 tractors felt excessive. They weren't wrong, they were simply built for a future that hadn't fully arrived. Number 3. Versatile 1150. The Versatile 1150 was the embodiment of the 1980s horsepower race. Designed to deliver enormous pulling power, this tractor featured massive Cummins engines, heavy frames, and drivetrains capable of sustained punishment. On paper and in the field, it was extraordinary. But its true problem wasn't mechanical, it was economic. The 1150 arrived at a time when many farmers were downsizing, not expanding. Credit was tight, crop prices were volatile, and risk tolerance was low. A tractor that demanded large implements, heavy fuel consumption, and specialized maintenance was difficult to justify, even if it could dramatically increase productivity under the right conditions. Technically, the machine was ahead of its era. Traction management, cooling capacity, and drivetrain durability all pointed toward the future of large-scale farming. Versatile understood that fewer tractors doing more work would eventually become the norm. But in the 1980s, many farms still relied on multiple smaller machines rather than one giant workhorse. Maintenance also required a shift in mindset. Components were heavy, repairs required proper lifting equipment, and not every shop was prepared. This created downtime anxiety, even though the tractors themselves were fundamentally robust. Today, tractors in the Versatile 1150s class are everywhere on large farms. In its own time, however, the 1150 felt excessive, risky, and economically intimidating. It wasn't too powerful, it was just too early. Number 2. John Deere 8855. The John Deere 8850 stands as one of the boldest engineering statements the company made in the 1980s. At a time when most farms were still operating with conventional row crop tractors in the 120-180 horsepower range, Deere introduced a massive articulated four-wheel drive tractor powered by a V8 diesel engine. This wasn't incremental progress, it was a leap. The 8850 was designed to deliver sustained high output, heavy drawbar performance, and serious PTO capability, all wrapped in a platform that hinted at what large-scale farming would soon demand. What truly made the 8850 ahead of its time wasn't just horsepower. Deere integrated advanced hydraulic load and depth control systems that helped operators manage large implements with consistency. These systems allowed the tractor to automatically adjust hitch behavior based on soil resistance, a concept that would later evolve into modern implement automation. In the early 1980s, however, most farmers were still adjusting implements manually and relying on experience rather than feedback systems. The technology worked, but many didn't fully trust it. The V8 engine itself was both a marvel and a controversy. It delivered smooth, abundant power, but it also required careful maintenance, proper cooling, and attentive servicing. In an era when many operators preferred simpler inline engines they could diagnose by ear, the 8850's sophistication felt intimidating. Fuel consumption, while reasonable for its output, appeared excessive to farmers who didn't yet operate at the acreage scale needed to justify it. Another challenge was economics. The early 1980s farm crisis meant capital investment was risky. Buying a tractor that excelled only when paired with very large implements made sense for the future, not for a decade defined by caution and consolidation. As a result, the 8850 never reached the sales volumes its engineering deserved. Looking back, the 8850 predicted modern high-horsepower tractors with remarkable accuracy. Today's articulated machines rely on the same philosophy: fewer tractors, more power, smarter control. The 8850 wasn't flawed. It simply arrived before farms, financing, and mindsets had scaled up to meet it. Number 1. Case IH Magnum, 1987. At the top of the list sits a tractor that didn't just predict the future, it defined it. The Case IH Magnum, launched in 1987, was a turning point in tractor history. Developed after the merger of Case and International Harvester, the Magnum represented a clean-sheet design philosophy that broke away from decades of incremental updates. Nearly every major manufacturer today still follows the template this tractor introduced. The Magnum's most revolutionary feature was its operator-first design. The cab offered exceptional visibility, reduced noise, intuitive control placement, and a sense of refinement that was unheard of in its class. This wasn't luxury for luxury's sake, it was productivity engineering. Case IH understood that operators were spending longer hours in the field, and fatigue directly affected output and safety. In 1987, many farmers still saw this as unnecessary. Within a decade, it became non-negotiable. Mechanically, the Magnum delivered reliability with sophistication. Its transmission options balanced strength with ease of use, and its hydraulic system supported modern implements with precision. The tractor was designed as an integrated system, where engine, drivetrain, hydraulics, and operator environment worked together rather than existing as separate components. This systems thinking approach was radical at the time, so why was it too advanced? Timing. The late 1980s farming economy was still fragile. Many buyers were reluctant to invest in premium machines, even if those machines promised long-term efficiency gains. Dealers also faced a learning curve. Selling productivity, comfort, and system integration required a different conversation than selling horsepower and steel. Ironically, once the farming economy stabilized in the 1990s, the Magnum exploded in popularity. Farmers quickly realized that this was the tractor everything else would be compared to. Its success reshaped the industry, forcing competitors to rethink cab design, ergonomics, and systems integration. The Magnum wasn't just ahead of its time, it created the time that followed. Few machines can claim that legacy. Those tractors weren't a mistake, they were previews of the future. Many of the ideas that failed in the 1980s are now standard features on modern machines. The only difference? Today, farmers are ready for them. These tractors remind us that innovation doesn't always win immediately. Sometimes it has to wait decades to be understood. Which one of these futuristic 80s tractors deserved a second chance? Drop your pick in the comments. I read every one. If you enjoy forgotten machines, real tractor rivalries, and engineering that arrived too early, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned. Until next time, respect the past, understand the future, and keep the iron moving.